Hi everyone, I'm Dina with Mills Family Gardening. We live in North Texas, Zone 8A. Today is a beautiful April day, and in this video I'd like to show you 15 annual flowers that are easy to start from seed. All these flowers require full sun, and we also fertilize all our flowers in our whole garden with liquid fish fertilizer and more bloom. And the first flower we're going to start with is Larkspur. Larkspur grows well in all growing zones. It tolerates temperatures down to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 40 degrees Celsius. Larkspur reseeds easily. I started the seeds last spring, and I had only 3 colors: white, dark purple, and some pink colors. But Larkspur cross-pollinates so easily that you can see that this year, all these plants that have come up from volunteer seeds that dropped last year, they cross-pollinated. So this year we have various colors and shades of pink, and we have different shades of purple. You can see we have dark purple and also light purple. Over there we have pinkish purple color, but I think it also cross-pollinated with the pink color, and so it's gotten in between pink and purple. This year I started about 6 plants of Larkspur from seed, and I planted them in the other area of our garden. But all these Larkspur flowers that you see here, they sprouted from the seeds that got dropped last year from Larkspurs that we grew last year. A lot of these Larkspur plants started emerging from the ground last fall in about October or November. They survived through our winter, and the lowest temperature that we had last winter was about 11 degrees Fahrenheit for a couple of nights, and they survived all that cold temperature without being covered, and now they're blooming nicely. So Larkspur can tolerate really cold temperatures. The next flower is Dahlia. They grow in zones 3 to 11, but in zones 9 through 11 they can be perennial. Now in zone 8 they can be perennial if they are covered well with mulch or some frost protection cover. I started these Dahlia plants from seed because I got inspired by another Texas gardener who also grows them from seed. Here in Texas we cannot grow Dahlia varieties that have these huge flowers, but we can grow smaller flowered varieties and they still look pretty. This variety is called Colorette Mix Reggae, I believe, and I got the seeds on eBay. I started them back in February, or maybe it was late January, and I planted them outside at the end of March, and now they're blooming beautifully. In warmer zones, dahlias can be left in the ground over the winter as long as the soil is well draining and does not stay wet. The next flower is Cosmos. This variety is called Candy Floss Red. All Cosmo flowers reseed easily. We also have an orange variety, and I planted them only once, and ever since then, for several years, they have been reseeding. I have not planted them again from seed, and all those seeds come up on their own from the plants from the previous years. If you would like Cosmo flowers to reseed, make sure to leave the flowers on the plant until the flowers dry out, and then they will form some long dark seeds, and keep those seeds on the stem, and those seeds will drop readily on the ground, and whenever the temperature is right and the sunlight is right, the seeds will emerge and start producing new flowers. The next flower is Gumrina. It grows in zones 2 to 11. It's an annual. It does not tolerate light frost. You might notice that I planted Gumrina in the same container with pansies, and that's because pansies are still growing really well right now. They'll be growing well for another month, but in about mid-May or end of May, pansies will start winding down, and that's why I planted Gumrina here, so that while pansies are growing, Gumrina will be growing at the same time, and hopefully in about a month Gumrina will be much better and will fill up the container nicely. I planted 2 Gumrinas in this container, one on this side and then the other on this side, in hopes that they will fill up the whole container as they grow. Gumrina is a heat-loving flower. It tolerates even our Texas summers. Even when it stays here in the hundreds Fahrenheit for days or even months, it keeps blooming as long as you give them water occasionally. Preferably they need to be watered at least once a week or twice a week, depending on how hot it is. But Gumrina will bloom from spring till freeze. The next flower on our list is Bachelor Buttons. They grow in zones 2 to 11. They tolerate frost really well. In fact, they can tolerate really cold temperatures. Several years ago we had a winter when temperatures went down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 17 degrees Celsius, and all these Bachelor Buttons, after they already emerged from the ground, they stayed green through all that freeze. They survive the freeze and start blooming the following spring. So Bachelor Buttons do not need to be started from seed indoors. The seeds can be planted outside, straight into the ground in the fall or spring, and they will grow just fine and they will survive the freeze. At least here in Texas, they survive our winters so well. The next flower is status. It grows well in zones 2 to 11, but in zones 9 through 11, it's a perennial. This plant survived our last winter when the temperatures went down to 11 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 nights in a row. And I covered this whole row with a double layer of frost cover, and this status survived. The status that it did not cover, it was in another row, did not survive those temperatures. So if you live in a climate similar to ours, you can cover your status and it will survive the freezing temperatures. The next flower is celosia. This variety specifically is called Jessica Coxcomb Mix. I started them from seed back in January, and I planted them here too early. It was still cold, but they were getting too large for small containers. Celosia grows well in zones 2 to 11, but in zones 9 through 11, it's a perennial. It reseeds easily if you let it go to seed and then keep the flowers on the plant. The flowers will dry out and their tiny black seeds will drop on the ground. And if you do not disturb the ground, the seeds will emerge in the fall or next spring. Celosia really needs warm temperatures to grow well. Since I planted these celosias while it was still cool, they're growing really slowly. But once it starts warming up more in May or June, they'll be growing much faster and they'll be larger in size. I started another variety of celosia. It's called Plumosa Mix. I planted them in a container, but I left them outside when our temperature went down to 34 degrees Fahrenheit. So they got a little bit stressed and they're not growing as fast. They don't look as good, but I'm hoping that as it warms up, those flowers will be growing much faster and will be much brighter. The next flower is Matsumoto China Esther. They're right here. They're not fully open, but I'm hoping by the time we're done editing the video, they will open up and we can show you the beauty of the flowers. This specific variety is non-hardy. It's an annual variety. Different varieties of Esther can be perennials depending on the variety. Esters can also be sown directly in the ground. They don't have to be started indoors. And this Esther specifically is blooming in the spring. I thought they would be blooming in the fall because that's what I know about Esters, but I'm surprised to see that they all are covered in flower buds and pretty soon we'll enjoy their beautiful blooms. The next flower is Nasturtium. I started them from seed back in January and transplanted them outside at the end of February after we had our bad freeze. And they're blooming now. Nasturtiums are edible. You can use them in salads or in cooking. Nasturtiums grow in zones 2 to 11, but in zones 9 through 11, they're perennial. And they love cooler weather. That's why they grow so well in late winter and early spring here in Texas. But nasturtiums do not tolerate our Texas summers. They die, and that's when I can harvest seeds from flowers and plant them again in the fall or next spring. Nasturtiums tolerate light frost, but not freezing temperatures. They really prefer daytime temperatures of 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius. The next flower is calendula. This variety that we have here is called Playtime Mix. I ordered them on Baker Creek Seeds. Calendula grows well in zones 2 to 11, but in zones 9 through 11, they can act as perennials. Here in North Texas, calendula grows well in early spring, but once Texas summer arrives, they start winding down. They don't bloom as much. They do survive through the summer if you keep watering them, and then they will rebloom in the fall. And also, they can drop seeds, and if you leave the soil undisturbed, the seeds will come up next spring. But it's much better to start calendula in January or maybe even December so that you can enjoy the blooms by now. That's what I did. I started the seeds back in January, and now in April they're blooming so nicely. The next on our list are zinnias. They grow so well in zones 2 through 11. They do not tolerate any frost or freeze. All these zinnias that you see here came up from the seeds that got dropped from zinnias that we had last year. I did not start any seeds of zinnias this year, so you can tell that zinnias reseed easily. Once you have zinnias, most likely you will have them for years to come. If you leave the flowers on the plant, let the flowers dry out, and then those seeds will drop on the ground, or you can simply sprinkle the dry seeds from those dead flowers everywhere you want them to go, and then the next spring all the seeds will come up. This variety of zinnia is a short variety. It's called Salsa Mix, and they will stay pretty short, about 12 or 18 inches tall, and they will be blooming all the way till freeze. The next flower is Patunias. They grow well in zones 2 to 11, but in zones 9 to 11 they're perennial. This is an heirloom variety of petunias. That's why they're not covered in blooms like a lot of cultivated varieties are, like those petunias in that container container, you can see that they are covered in blooms. Nevertheless, this variety is very interesting. First of all, the flowers are huge, and all the edges of flowers are covered in ruffles, which make them look very beautiful and interesting. In general, petunias are not frost-hardy plants, but when the plant is established and it's a mature size, it will tolerate cold temperatures. One year, we had some freezing temperatures. It was even below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. I went outside and I was surprised to see heirloom petunias still blooming. They survived the freeze, but they were also protected. You can see that we have a fence and we have trees, so our backyard is protected from cold wind and colder temperatures. The next flower is moss rose or portulaca. It grows well in zones 2 to 11, but in zones 10 and 11, it's a perennial. It reseeds easily. You can actually leave the plant in a container, let it go to seed, and the seeds will drop in the soil. And if you do not disturb the soil, the seeds will come up in the fall or the next spring. They love hot weather, but they do not like our Texas summers as much. When it stays in the hundreds Fahrenheit for days or months, they do start slowing down in their blooming. Nevertheless, they stay alive, and if you keep watering them, they will come back in the fall and start blooming again. The next flower that I tried for the first time this year is called Livingstone Daisy. I think it might be a variety of a nice plant. I started the seeds back in January and transplanted them outside after all danger of frost had passed, and now they're blooming nicely with light pink flowers. I thought they would be blooming more profusely, but I'm just happy that they're alive, and we'll see what other colors we can get from these plants. And the final flower that's easy to grow from seed is marigolds. I think every garden should have marigolds. They come in all colors and shades and sizes. This specific variety is called French dwarf marigolds. I did not plant them from seed this year. All these marigold plants came up from seed that got dropped last year by marigolds that grew here last year. And you can see that they're growing so well, and they're already almost blooming. And a lot of gardeners know that marigolds are good companion plants because they deter a lot of pests, and they're also edible. I personally do not like their taste and flavor, so I don't use them in cooking, but you can certainly try and see what you think. And those are 15 annual flowers that we started from seed this year. Thank you so much for watching this video, and have a great day.